Assalamu alaikum. We are starting off with this paper that we had in October, November 2025, and this is paper 2, variant 1. Now, for this paper, before we get started with this paper, we all by now do know that both paper 1 and paper 2, they are of 60 marks. In fact, paper 3 and paper 4 that we have in A2 are of 60 marks as well. As we speak about these papers, as we speak about paper 2, especially, I would want everyone to know that. Let me just remind you, just in case if you've forgotten, or let me just put this to your knowledge. Our papers are tested on the basis of assessment objectives, and there are three core assessment objectives that we have, and they're named as AO1, AO2, AO3. And what you see in front of you right now is the syllabus. And for since we are discussing paper 2 and paper 2 hamare paas is AS and this is AS, right? Now, if you have a closer look at this, you'd see that knowledge and understanding that has to do with the rote learning, which has more to do with the learning part. इसके लिए आपको ज्यादा पेपर 1 पे फोकस करना पड़ता है, ठीक है? And if you talk about paper 2, for paper 2, the focus is more on your ability to be able to apply the knowledge and understanding that you've gained. So for paper 2, you are to prepare yourself through the research methods that have been taught to you right at the beginning. Now, about these research methods that we have, they would be tested through paper 2. And along with research methods, it is also expected from you to remember content from your core studies as well. So, but this focuses more on your ability to be able to apply the knowledge that you've gained for paper 2. So for paper 2, there is more focus on application, and then comes analysis and evaluation, and then third in line comes knowledge understanding. Now, having said that, let's quickly take this ahead. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, October, November 2025, variant 1, variant 2.1, research methods. If we have a look at the first question, the question over here reads, a researcher is conducting an observation to investigate the study habits of students. Now, this question, as I see it, is a question that is testing your knowledge, your understanding, and your ability to be able to uh, apply the knowledge that you've gained in the B part through research methods alone. And this question is not linked to any study as for what I see right now. So researcher is conducting an observation to investigate the study habits of students. The observation uses a fixed list of behavioral categories. Now, a fixed list of behavioral categories, as I read this as a student, this should remind me that behavioral categories, we find them when we talk about structured observation. So structured observation is the first thing that should click me. Now, explain whether this observation is structured or unstructured. Now, I think I've already answered this question here. So the question that we have, that is 1A, this is a 1 mark question, and the command word we have over here is explain. I've said this many times, I've mentioned this a lot of times earlier. I'd like to reiterate on this. Read your questions thoroughly. Now, over here, if we talk about question number 1, so question number 1, let's count in total. Okay, kitne marks ka question hai? We have a 1 mark question here, we have a 2 mark question here, and we have a 2 more mark question over here. So question 1 in total is of 5 marks. And for you, because you don't want to lose those 5 marks, I'd want you to read this part thoroughly. Read it twice or even read it thrice if required. Trust me, it does not take a lot of time. So explain whether this observation is structured or unstructured. This is structured observation. But do you understand? Do you so a typical mistake many students make at this point is they'll simply write down structured observation. Are you answering the question? No, you did not answer the question, because the question expected you to explain if it is an example of a structured observation or an unstructured observation. Did you do this explaining part? No, you did not. If you're just writing down structured, you're not getting your mark. For you to get that 1 mark, you'd have to explain it. Structured observation because there's a fixed list of behavioral categories, or you could write structured because only set of observation will be recorded. Only a set of observation would be recorded, or in other words, there'd be specific behaviors that would be recorded. Now, I'd like to assume most of you would have an idea about what structured observation is, but again, the likelihood of students making a mistake over here and unnecessarily throwing away marks is always high. So if the command word is explain, you might as well explain. One. Number two, let's move on to the second part over here. That is 1B part one. Suggest. Now, this question where you asked to suggest, this is again uh, tapping on AO2, where you're expected to apply the knowledge that you've gained through research methods. Suggest two behavioral categories that the researcher could use to observe the study habits of students. Now, let me go back to the question again. The question, the information that I had early, the information that I had at the beginning of the question, it said a researcher is conducting an observation. There's a researcher who's conducting an observation to investigate the study habits of students. So what is this investigation on? This investigation is on the study habits of students. The observation uses a fixed list of behavioral categories. So getting back to the question, suggest two behavioral categories that the researcher could use to observe the study habits of students. Now, questions where the command word used is suggest, I see students getting confused here. One, figure out what the command word is demanding. Then the command word over here is suggest. Number two, the next thing you do is you quickly have a look at the total amount of marks that have been allocated to this question. Now, I see there's a question where I've been asked to suggest any two behavioral categories, and this is a 2-mark question. So the suggestion must be an observable or a measurable category of student or study habits. And that is how you get your marks. And again, because this is a question where you've been asked to suggest, there's no there's no definitive content. I mean, you could go on writing anything that's correct, anything that's appropriate and in context to what the question is demanding from you. So you could write that time spending, the total amount of time that students spend uh, working or studying. You could calculate that. Number one. Number two, the frequency at which they use books. Number three, the frequency at which they take notes using flashcards, if they're studying alone or not. The number of time the study, the amount of time they opt for studying with other people, or studying while they're listening to music, or studying while they're doodling. So there are numerous categories. You see 2, 4, 6, and 8 different options that the examiner has given you. But then again, you're not restricted to these 8 options. If you want to write anything besides this, you may as well. Let's take this ahead. Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. We have question 1B part 2 here. This reads, for one of the behavioral categories you suggested in part B1. Sorry. For one of the behavioral categories you suggested in part B1, suggest one methodological problem suggest again one methodological problem with using this category to observe the study habit of students. Now, you were asked to suggest any 2 points over here in the previous question. That was question 1B part 1. Now they're asking you to suggest one methodological problem with using the category that to observe the study behavior of students. Now, based on what you chose, now if I talk about this part, okay, now another important point that I just mentioned a minute earlier, do not forget having a look at the total marks that have been allocated to this particular question. So it's a 2-mark question, and typically for 2-mark questions that ask us for a suggestion, you get the first mark for suggesting, and you get the second mark for linking it to that particular case or to that particular question. So one problem could be with the number of books used, and this is what has been picked up from here. So a problem could be the category may be underestimated or miscategorized. This is the suggestion, as a book could be on their phones or iPad. Now you linked it, right? So what if a student has an iPad in front of him or her, and the student keeps on flipping from one file to another, to another, to another? You as a researcher might not be able to conduct a valid research, or the validity of your research might get compromised. And this is, of course, a problem. And one more thing, another possibility of students making this mistake, not very often though, but do not forget they're asking you about a methodological problem. The word over here, beta, is a methodological problem. I mean, there's a possibility students might end up writing, oh, a student might feel hungry or the student might feel distracted. So you need to, based on what you had suggested earlier, this question, this part is linked to the previous part, that was 1B part 1. The next one problem with note taking or doodling. This is the second part, note taking or doodling, this or this. You could write, this is difficult to operationalize. How would you operationalize? If someone's taking notes, you'd have to come up with a criteria. This reminds me of the study that was conducted by Andrade. Andrade conducted a research on doodling, and I remember to be able to operationalize doodling, Andrade started to refer to it as a shape shading task, and there was a column that was there, and right next to the column there were shapes in I believe there were squares and circles that were there in different rows. So you need a way to be able to operationalize it. If you talk about taking notes, notes could be taken by students on a sticky note as well, or notes could be taken on a proper register. How is it, or what way would you use to be able to operationalize this? So when does one note end and the next one start? This is difficult, and it's difficult to state what is meant by a note or a doodle or a picture. How do you differentiate that? The third one, a problem with studying while listening to music. The category may be underestimated or miscategorized. Again, as they may be listening to music on their headphones, which the researcher will not hear. The researcher may assume they're listening to music if they're wearing headphones. So again, this is a methodological problem again. The fourth one, a problem with studying with others or alone. The category may be underestimated or overestimated, as they may be talking about things with others that are not to do with studying. I mean, probably you're talking about anything, any. Let's just say the current global crisis. So, as they may be talking about things with others that are not to do with studying, they may seem to be studying alone, but they're actually studying together using electronic. Now, do you realize? Do you realize on for every different option that the examiner is try to provide you, you're getting the first mark for suggestion, you're getting the second mark for linking. The suggestion is that methodological problem, and the linking is to the content or the information that was provided to you in that initial rubric. That is this. So yeah, I have a question. What does it mean by the category being underestimated and overestimated? The category being underestimated or overestimated, when we, this is where you see this written, at least. Okay, so how would you be able to figure out if there's a student, you see the student wearing a headgear, you see the student wearing headphones, you won't be able to tell if they're actually uh if they're actually listening to music or there's anything else, or they're just wearing headphones. So categorization might not be very easy. You might end up underestimating or you might end up overestimating. For instance, there are two friends, they have their books open right in front of them, and they've left you under the impression that they're studying. What if they're not? You might end up overestimating this. You might end up noting that they studied for 30 minutes, whereas in reality, they just studied for 3 minutes, and the rest 27 minutes they were talking about things from here, there, and everywhere. So there's a possibility you might overestimate or you might underestimate, right? There's a possibility if they, again, if I talk about this particular problem that I have in front of me, this particular suggestion, last one. So what if you see the students, what if they leave you under the impression that they actually having conversation and not studying, whereas in reality they are studying, while at the same time they have this very happy go uh, I mean, from the facial expressions, the body language, it does not, what if it does not appear to be that they're studying, whereas in reality they are? So there's a possibility of you over categorizing or you overestimating or you underestimating. Now let's take this ahead. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let's move on to the second question. So the first question that we had over here was of 5 marks. And let's quickly move on to the second question. The second question in the study by Savard and Silverman. Now, this second question is on research methodology again, but this requires you to have your, this requires for you to have what do you call it, concrete understanding and knowledge on the study that was conducted by Savard and Silverman as well. So this, in this study by Savard and Silverman on button phobia, imagery imagery exposure was investigated. During this, the boy reported a severity rating for distress at three different time frames. State what was meant by the time frame 1, 2, and 3. Now, here you go. Let's read the question again, like I suggested. In the study, and now this rubric, this initial piece of information needs to be read at least twice, if not thrice, ideally thrice. And trust me, it does not take long. In the study by Sabit and Silverman on button phobia, imagery exposure was investigated. Fine. During the study, the boy reported a severity rating. Just let's highlight this as well. For distress at three different time frames. State what was meant by the time frame 1, 2, and 3. Now, the command word over here is state, and this happens to be a 2-mark question. When it is a 2-mark question, I need to provide the examiner with enough of content or information that makes me eligible for 2 marks. Now, 2 out of 3 correct time frames. If you write 2 out of 3 correct time frames, you get 1 mark. If you write all 3 correct time frames, then only you get 2 marks. So, time frame number 1 was before the imagery exposure or the therapy session. Time frame 2 was midway through the imagery or the exposure of the therapy. And time frame 3 was after the imagery exposure of the therapy. Now that you have read the marking scheme for this, you know it was not a difficult question. But just question yourself, if you would have been sitting in the examination hall in November 2025, sitting for variant 1, and if you would have had this question, the word time frames 1, 2, and 3 might have ended up confusing many of you. So know your core studies well. Everything that's written there in the paper, if you are one of those who's looking forward towards scoring high in your examination, or trying to hit a 60 on 60, make sure that you know your content well, and you know your study inside out. So moving on to the second part, outline. Okay, I've said this earlier as well. Since you've been asked about all the 3 time frames, that is time frame 1, time frame 2, time frame 3, you're expected to write all 3 of them correctly to be able to get 2 marks. Even if you've written 2 of them correctly and 1 of them is incorrect, you end up getting 1 mark and not 2. Taking this ahead, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, outline the B part to this. Outline the change in severity rating from time frame 1 to time frame 3 when the boy had to imagine hundreds of buttons falling on his body. Now, the keyword again is, sorry, the command word again over here is outline. And this is a 1-mark question. Now, in this question, the examiners asks you to outline the change in severity rating. So you have to outline the change in severity rating from 1 to frame 3. And as we all know, I mean, if you are one of those who was able to score a 2 on 2 on this in the first part, that is 2A, part 2B should not be a problem for you. So for you to write down for you to outline the change, you get this mark. The boy's distress rating decreased over time from time frame 1 to time frame 3. Now, whatever you're writing, make sure you are not make sure you're ensuring that the examiner does not get an undue opportunity for deducting marks. So there's a possibility some students might write, oh, there was a decrease, but write it properly. The boy's distress decreased over time from time frame 1 to time frame 3. This is what the question was. Now let's take this ahead. This was question number 2. And as we see question number 2, this question in total was of 3 marks. Moving on to question number 3, this question again is testing you on your knowledge and understanding. Because remember, I did not say paper number 2 does not have knowledge and understanding. Yes, this is worth 22% only, but nonetheless, it is there. So you cannot skip this part too. Now, the study by Holzel et al., this is from the biological approach. Mindfulness and brain scans used participants who wanted to reduce their stress and were able to have an MRI scan. So these were 2 of the criterias. They wanted to reduce their stress and they were able to have an MRI scan. There were several other inclusion criteria, reasons for being included in the sample. So again, this question looks like it is expecting you to know your core study real well. Like I say, you should know your study inside out. So at least, the least you can do is I keep on encouraging students to focus on the content that you have in the books. And even if you're someone who's looking forward towards hitting an A grade, a high A, which with an intention of an A steric ahead and inshallah an A2, the book is enough. Trust me, the book is enough. You just need to stop hating books and yeah, open it, make notes on your book, annotate, and it's going to help you. So outline two other inclusion criterias. Not taking any medicines could be one. It was one of the criterias. They should not have any. They should not have any physical or psychological health issues. No meditation classes in the past 6 months. No more than 4 classes in the past 5 years, or 10 classes in lifetime. The age range from 25 to 55 years. Commitment to attend all classes. Commitment to do all homework. No no contraindication for MRI scanning, such as metal implants, claustrophobia, and all were expected to be right-handed. Now, these were the inclusion criteria that the participants. This was inclusion criteria that was used when the researchers were recruiting participants for this research. Now, as I see this, I would want to remind you all these marking schemes that you have, they give you enough of information. Now, if I talk about this particular question that I have in front of me, this is just in case there's a possibility that you might there's a possibility you might be knowing only two of them. And seeing this gives you an opportunity in a very organized manner to know more about this inclusion criteria. And, you know, going through the past papers or using past paper questions and the marking schemes does not at all mean that this would be the next question that you'd have in your examination. I mean, there's a possibility because this is variant 2-1 and sitting in Pakistan through zone 4, there's a possibility this might end up being a 2-mark question, a 3-mark question, or even a 4-mark question for you. So yeah, put the books to the right use, put the marking schemes to the right use. Moving on, for each of the inclusion criteria outlined in part A. So this was a 2-mark question, and 3B is a 2-mark question too. Question number 3 is of 4 marks too, in total as well. For each of the inclusion criteria outlined in part A, suggest why each inclusion criteria was important in the study, why each inclusion criteria was important in the study, other than to ensure that the experimental and control groups were similar. Now, this part too, like I say, read your questions well, read your questions thoroughly. तो कोई भी दो इंक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया जो आपने इससे पिछले वाले क्वेश्चन के अंदर लिखे हैं, आप suggest करें, you're expected to suggest why each of these inclusion criteria was important to the study, other than to ensure that the experimental and the control groups were similar. So, not taking any medication, let's take this as an example. Not taking any medication, how is it that this would have affected the research? The symptoms could have reduced even without mindfulness, the stress symptoms, because this was about stress reduction, or just zoom this a little so that no meditation classes in the past not taking any medication, no meditation class in the past 6 months. Okay, now that's a separate point, and yeah, that's a separate point. And here you go. Because classes got obscure brain changes due to study or the intervention IV MBSR, ensuring that the changes were due to current MBSR and not any previous change because of them being regular, or even if not a regular, them being someone who has already had an experience of MBSR. So the third possible point, no more than 4 classes in the 5 years or 10 in the lifetime, so that it could not obscure brain changes due to studies, intervention, and MBSR. That is what would have helped you. 25 years to 55 years old people, how is this affecting? Younger or older adults could have brain differences or impairment. There's a possibility. Another point, commitment to attend classes and do homework. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to tell if MBSR was the actual cause. The next one, no contraindications for MRI scanning because as metal implants may cause harm to the participants. All of them having to be right-handed to ensure that the differences were not due to differences in brain lateralization. Now, there was, I mean, I've highlighted it so that you understand. The first part, what I've highlighted in yellow gives you that first mark, and what I have no, what I've highlighted over here in yellow is you making a suggestion, and the purple part is linking it back to the study. So suggest why each inclusion criteria was important in this study. There were two you were asked for in the last question. See, all of these questions, they linked, and the rest, again, through this question, you see how and why this question fits better into paper two, because they're asking you how the research or the findings of the research would have been affected. So taking this ahead, Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim, to the third question, that is question number 4. And as we see question number 4 in front of us, the study by Baron Cohen et al. Used an independent measures design. Explain one strength of using an independent measures design. Independent measures design, for in our AS psychology syllabus, there are 3 different experimental designs that we need to know. And to name them, we have the repeated measures design, we have the independent measures design, and the matched pairs design. Explain one strength of using an independent measures design. And since the rubric or the initial information that you received is about the study that was conducted by Baron Cohen, you should try to the best of your capacity that you're providing details or linking it back to the study. So one strength of using an independent measures design: there are less chances of demand characteristics than repeated measures design, which is a strength. But for you to get the second mark, you need to provide detail. And the detail over here is because the participants only see or they go through one level of the independent variable. One. Number 2, another possible example, this can be used to study fixed or pre-existing groups, as participants could not be both uh, both as Asperger's syndrome participants, also referred to as autistic participants, and be in the control group. If you remember this, in this particular study that was conducted by Baron Cohen, the participants, they were divided into 4 different groups, and the first group, it was only the first group that comprised of individuals who were autistic or who had Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism. Collectively, you refer to them as autistic people. So it isn't possible for anyone to be autistic and not be autistic at the same time. Remember, group number 2, group number 3, and group number 4 included individuals who were not autistic. So you'd either be autistic or you'd be not autistic. You can't be both. Moving on, this eliminates the chance of auto effect. Now, a major disadvantage that researchers face when they use repeated measures design. Now, what is a repeated measures design? A repeated measures design is when you are making the same participants go through different experimental conditions. जब आप उन्हीं participants को अलग-अलग experimental conditions से go through करा रहे होते हैं, उसे हम repeated measures design कहते हैं. Now, because you're making the participants go through different levels of the IV, because you're repeating the participants or you're reusing your participants, there's a possibility of order effect. Order effect, as you all should by now know, that we study 2 different types of order effect. We refer to them as the practice effect and the fatigue effect. Now, taking this ahead, because the participants only see one level of the IV. So the takeaway at this point should be your grip on the knowledge and understanding on these 12 core studies should be super strong. And at the same time, you should know how to answer your question well. I've come across many students who focus a lot on learning, and then they somewhat, because of some reason or the other, aren't really able to practice through the past papers well. So just see that you are not one of them. Now, taking this ahead, question number 4B, and question number 4, again, we see in total is of 4 marks. The study by Baron Cohen et al. Used an independent measures design. Explain one weakness of using an independent measures design. Now, one weakness. Okay, now one more thing. Another typical mistake I've seen students making. See, this says 1. This says 1. The examiner has written 1, and then the examiner has ensured that the word 1 is underlined too. There are students who'd be like, sir, what if I write more than 1 point? if you ask the examiners, they'd be like, we read both and then we answer the best. But I wouldn't really advise you to do that. So the amount of time you're wanting to spend writing two different answers, uh, you might as well just put your pen down, invest in this, give yourself some time, some good 20-30 seconds, and so that you're in a better position and you uh, know what you're writing is correct. So explain one strength of using an independent measures design. As we speak about, explain one weakness. As we speak about a weakness of using an independent measures design, how do we get the first mark? It is hard to control the effect of individual differences. One, which would be confounding variable which affects the dependent variable other than the independent variable. तो इंडिपेंडेंट मेजर्स डिजाइन का सबसे बड़ा फ्लॉ ही हमारे पास पार्टिसिपेंट वेरिएबल्स है. पार्टिसिपेंट वेरिएबल्स also referred to as individual differences. Individual differences. Now, as we speak about individual differences over here, or as we speak about participant variables over here, you know what is independent measures design? As we use the word independent measures design, we're talking about making different groups of individuals go through different levels of the IV. When you're making different individuals go through different levels of the IV, what if there are differences amongst those participants? What if they have different traits? What if there are demographic differences? And because of these other differences, the result of your research gets affected. There's a possibility. So it is hard to control the effect of individual differences, which would be a confounding variable which affects the DV. That is then the IB. That's exactly what I just said. Or you could see it works. Know that, understand this. The question, the command word over here was explained, and this is a 2-mark question. I'm talking about question 4B over here. You get the first mark for identification or identifying that weakness, and you get that second mark for either providing detail or linking. They both work. So you'd see this over here, and you'd see this over here as well. So example, the Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism, that is autistic group, might have had less experience with people than the control group. So there's a possibility. And because of autistic, there's because of them not uh, being very good with communication, the possibility that they might interact less, which again puts them into a disadvantaged position when it comes to being able to identify emotions. Now, let's take this ahead. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You will need a bigger sample for independent measures design as compared to repeated measures design. Now, let's just say if I'm a researcher, I'm going to conduct a research where for each group I need 30 participants, and there are 3 different groups I am trying to uh, collect data from. So if for each group I require 30 participants and there are 3 different groups, and I want to use an independent measures design, I'd need 30 plus 30 plus 30 participants. That together makes it 90 participants, which is again a bigger sample. And theoretically it's easy. There are students I've seen them while planning is they're like the sample would be this huge, but practically or realistically, when you're actually trying to recruit samples for any particular research, there are many practical issues that you come across, because of which getting the right people or the people who fit into your inclusion criteria might not be a very easy thing to do. So you will need a bigger sample, and obtaining a bigger sample might not be super simple. So which may be more difficult, especially if it's a hard to find sample. It's a hard to find sample. Now, if you remember, if I give an example through this particular research that was conducted by Baron Cohen, we know that the first group, that is group 1, that comprised of individuals who were autistic, only had 15 participants, and all of these 15 participants, they were males. Now, I'd like to assume there'd be some or the other issue, because of which some or the other practical issue, which might have resulted in the researchers, that is Baron Cohen and his team, are not being able to come up with a larger sample. So independent measures design जहाँ पे होता है, वहाँ पे आपको ज़्यादा लोग चाहिए होते हैं sample के लिए. And if it's a repeated measures design, even if you had 30 people in total, you would have used those 30 people, and you would have used the same 30 people and made them go through condition 1, condition 2, and condition 3. So which may be more difficult, especially if it's a hard to find sample, or if you want to link this. No, this is a detail too. This may lead to rising costs for the researcher, which may lead to a smaller sample and lower generalizability. Of course, the smaller your sample is, the more generalizability issues you'd face. And like when we're evaluating this research that was conducted by Baron Cohen, एक flaw उसमें ये भी था कि हमारे पास जो पहला group था, group number one, it only comprised of individuals who it only comprised of males. And again, the likelihood of the researchers uh, wanting to generalize the findings on females might be questionable. So let's take this ahead. This was question number 5. Let's hop on to question number. This was question number 4, and this question number 4 was of 4 marks in total. Moving on to question number 5. Question number 5. Let's have a look at what question number 5 has to say. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Sketch a graph. So you've been asked to sketch a graph on the axis in figure 4.1 to show a negative correlation between time spent watching television and the attention span. You must label the axis. So you're actually being marked for labeling the axis. And if we have a look at this, this is a 2-mark question. And axis labels, you either label both of them or the other way around. This would be, you get the first mark, and you get the second mark for sketching your graph in a manner that it shows there's a negative correlation. Now, two things that are worthy noting over here. You're getting the first mark for sketching, and you're getting the second mark for labeling the axis. So every word that you have in the question, you need to read it well, and you need to keep it in mind. Make sure you're focused when you're sitting in the examination hall. It's those 90 minutes that you spend in the examination hall. You need to walk into the examination center well rested. There are so many students who try pulling an all-nighter. That probably worked for you when you were doing your O-levels. Trust me, it does not work in A-levels. One. Number two, as I showed you, I'd like to show it to you again. There are more marks that the examiner has dedicated to your ability to be able to apply the knowledge that you've gained. And for you to be able to apply the knowledge that you've gained, you need to be in the best state of your mind. And for those 90 minutes, it's not only about learn, and then go and reproduce what you've learned. So you need to put this to use as well, especially for questions that require application. And yeah, go well rested. Make sure you're not stressing out unnecessarily, and read through your content well, and go through the marking schemes, and inshallah you do good, great, and practice questions. So moving on to question number 6 here. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now this sixth question that you see in front of you, this is a 6-mark question. Now typically we see the 6-mark question being a 6-mark question only, but recently we've had questions where the 6-mark question is question number 5, which is fine. I mean, this should not concern you. So describe measures of central tendency using any example. This being a 6-mark question where you've been asked to describe measures of central tendency. The command word over here is describe. The command word over here is describe. And for this specific 6-mark question, a few things that I've mentioned this earlier in many classes, but I'd like to take this opportunity to redo or re-say what I typically do. For this question specifically, this example part is important. This is super important. And as you see this S over here, I mean, you could use one example and elaborate it real well, or you could use multiple examples. Now, know that these examples that this example part, you're not doing a favor to the examiner. It's a part of the question. You're getting marks for that example, and this example could be from any course study. It could be from any other study. Now, let's just say you are a student who is sitting for composite papers. You're an accelerated student, and you're sitting for paper 1, 2, 3, and 4, all 4 of them, and you want to use any study that you've done in A2s. Sure, go ahead. So much so that even if you're making up an example of your own, you still get marks. So the examples over here could be through any course study, could be through any other study, or any other study that you just came up on your own. You just need to demonstrate your strong grip over whatever the methodological concept is that the examiner wants you to describe. So having a look at the generic marking scheme here, the generic marking scheme, you see it in red. 1 mark for each definition or point of detail, up to maximum 2 for each term or concepts. Now, describe measures of central tendency. There are 3 different measures of central tendency that are part of a syllabus. You studied them: the mean, median, and mode. So, 1 mark for each definition or point of detail, 1 mark for each example, max 2 for each term or concept, up to maximum of 4. Examples can include examples from any studies, core study, other studies, or candidates' own studies. Maximum 4 mark if no example or if only about one term or concept. So if you've given only one example, you just get at max you get 4 marks. Only one example needed to access 6 marks. So एक example आपको देनी ही देनी है, because I mean you have to give one example at least. So the measures of central tendency, you're expected to describe them. It's a way to find the typical average of data set, a single number to describe the data. Example, a mean, a median, or a mode. All of us, all of you at this point. See, as we're discussing these past paper questions, I'd like to assume you know all of this and you've done your research methodology well and you know your core studies well. If not, this class won't really help you a lot then. So measures of central tendency are the different ways to find the typical or the average of data set or any single number to describe that data. An example, you want to give an example, it could be through a mean, a median, or mode. Now, examples through, you could give a description of how you calculate mode. You could give a description on how you calculate median or how you calculate mean, that is the average. Now, it's on your discretion if you want to give examples from the core studies. They're here and they're ample of examples. I think the last time I counted them, there were 11 examples that you have. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So yeah. Now, you have all, if we try figuring out the studies from the biological approach, we have Dementian treatment from the biological approach. We have a Holzel from the biological approach, and we have Hassett from the biological approach. If we talk about studies from the cognitive approach, we have Baron Cohen from the cognitive approach. We have Pozzolo from the cognitive approach, and we have Andrade from the cognitive approach. If we talk about the learning approach, we have the study conducted by Bandura, Ross and Ross. We have the study by Fagan, and we have the research that was conducted by, where am I missing? So the study that is missing over here is actually Savage and Silverman from the learning approach. Yeah. Now, if you have a look at the questions from the social approach, we have all 3 of them: Milgram, Perry, and Pilyavin. Now, out of these 11 different options you have, you may choose any of them. One more thing that I'd like discussing here. So in the study conducted by Andrade, there was mean calculated: Bandura mean, Baron Cohen mean, Timmerman Friedman mean, Fagan mean, Hassett et al. Mean, Holzel et al. Mean, Milgram mean, Perry et al. Mean, Pilyavin mean, and Pozzolo mean. So just look at the amount of time mean has been used or mean has been calculated, which is again an example of measure of central tendency. So I think in the last lesson, if I'm not mistaken, no, I'm not mistaken, the last lesson I had discussed a couple of, in fact, I had discussed, I believe I discussed all the 6-mark questions that we have had so far after your syllabus change in 2024. So I believe there were 7 questions from 2024 and 7 questions from 2025. I discussed all of them in detail, and I had some answers to discuss as well. And for what I recall, I had shared the video link to that on your group as well. So yeah, you might as well go through them if you're someone who is if you're still not very confident about a typical 6-mark question. So the 6-mark question is an essential, and this is there in your paper. Now, having a look at this, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, taking this ahead, here onwards, after the 6-mark question, you would come across questions that would put a null situation in front of you, a new situation in front of you, and these questions, they're trying to test how well you can apply the knowledge that you have gained on research methodology. So what happens is they put up a null situation in front of you, and then you would have to walk yourself through this and answer all the questions that are there based on the knowledge and understanding that you've gained on research methodology. Now, question number 7. But before I proceed with this, I'd want to see this question number 7. This is 7A and this is 7B. Question number 7A is of 1 mark and 2 marks, and 7 should be 7C. They've written you. This is of 3 marks. And so question number 7 in total is of 6 marks. Why is it that I counted this? I counted this because I wanted you all to know that what I'm highlighting right now is to be understood and understood well. Because if you miss out on anything from the initial piece of information that you have received from the examiner, you're risking those 6 marks. Everything that's written there, read it at least twice, ideally thrice. If you're still not getting it, try a desi hack, try translating or it in your mother tongue so that you understand the initial piece of information or the rubric that has been provided to you by the examiner. So let's start this. Let's read this together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Professor March is interested in interpersonal distance. Now, here, Professor March is a person, and the reading the word interpersonal distance reminds me of the study that was conducted by Perry et al. From the social approach. Professor March is interested in interpersonal distance. He has met Dennis. So there's just one person known as Professor March. Another person he's met another person known as Dennis, who needs a large interpersonal distance. So Professor March met someone with the name Dennis, and this new person, Dennis, is someone who needs a large interpersonal distance, or Mr. Dennis likes it when he has his own personal space and he doesn't really like people being super close to him physically. Dennis has agreed to Professor March conducting a case study about him using a questionnaire. So a case study is what we're looking at. And of course, case study is not a data collection technique. And when you're using a case study, you are typically focusing on a single individual or small little group. And that person over here is Mr. Dennis. And when you're using a case study, you ought to have external data collection techniques. And in this case, Professor Dennis has agreed to participate and be a subject for Professor March, and they decide on collecting data through a questionnaire. Okay, I think I've read this well, but even when I feel I've understood this, I'd like to reread it one more time because I would not want to risk 6 marks. Professor March is interested in interpersonal distance. Okay. He has met Dennis, who needs a large interpersonal distance. Understood. Dennis has agreed to Professor March conducting a case study about him using a questionnaire. Perfect. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, let's take this ahead. Suggest, again, the command word over here is suggest. Why Dennis may prefer Professor March to use a questionnaire rather than a face-to-face interview. Now, keeping in mind the initial piece of information or the rubric that the examiner has provided us, we are expected to give a suggestion, and this is just worth 1 mark. Professor March would need to be too close. You know, when you talk about a face-to-face interview, there's a likelihood that the person who's getting the questionnaire filled, that is Professor March. In this case, he might have to be physically close to this person, Dennis, who does not really like people being close to him. Dennis does not need to be in the same room as Professor March. Again, you can hand over a question and just sit in another room, because Dennis may get distressed or nervous about Professor March being too close for a face-to-face interview. So you need to understand this, one. And do you realize your knowledge and understanding on the study by Perry et al. Was required. Now, what if you're someone who does not remember the study by Perry et al. And in that case, you wouldn't know what interpersonal distance is and you wouldn't understand this entire thing. So that was a simple one. Let's move on to the next one. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Suggest two examples. Suggest two examples of questions that Professor March could use. Two examples of questions that Professor March could use to collect data about the need Dennis has for a large interpersonal distance. So let's read this again. Suggest two examples of questions. There are two examples that we required that Professor March could use to collect data, about the need Dennis has for large interpersonal distance. Now, why is it that someone needs large interpersonal distance? And there are two examples that are required, and here you go. And there are two examples that are required. We need to understand that this person, Professor March, he would need details. And so examples of these questions would be: describe what people you cannot tolerate close to you. This could be, you just have to give examples that are correct, that are appropriate, and in context to the question that has been asked. Or describe why you cannot tolerate people close to you. So what sort of people is this? And why is this is another question. How do you feel when someone gets close to you? Rate how you felt when we met. 0 is okay and 5 is bad. Now, in this case, where you are wanting to gather quantitative data, make sure that you're operationalizing and you're explaining, you're clarifying what 0 means over here and what 5 means. Use a paper-based CIDS mark on lines for comfortable interpersonal distance. So this is again a possibility that could be used as well. So I would have opted for any other point and not the last one, because we've been asked to give two examples of questions. So nonetheless, the last one works because if you ask him to mark on lines for comfortable interpersonal distance, that again could be used as a question. C, your knowledge, your understanding, your grip on Perry et al. Was required here. Your grip on research method was required here. You should be able to come up with questions. You should be able to give examples of questions. I mean, there's a possibility this question 7B, if we tweak this a little, what if the examiner asked you to give an example of a question that helps you gather qualitative data? That restricts you even further. So taking this ahead, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Suggest one problem that Professor March could have when using a questionnaire to study Dennis. Again, one problem, and this is a 3-mark question. Now, this is a question I like. In a question of this sort, a major mistake, a popular mistake that I see many students making is they end up gaining just 1 mark out of 3. Why is it that this happens? You know what? Remember, I've been saying this since the very beginning. Understand your command word, but at the same time, you make sure that you are having a quick little look at the total amount of marks that have been allocated to that particular question, because you can tell through the number of lines that you get as well. For a 3-mark question, you'll be getting 6 lines in the examination. But so have a quick look at the number of marks. And you know what? The more marking schemes you go through, the more you get familiar with the generic marking criteria that the CIE uses, which would again reduce your chances of losing marks unnecessarily. So you get the first mark for identifying out the problem, and you get the second mark for providing detail, and the second and third mark for providing detail. You'd see that over here. An identified problem in this case could be number 1. Professor March may need to hand him the questionnaire. That's a problem. And another problem you could use is Dennis won't like being given paper for the CIDs. It may be more it may be more, may make it more likely. So, okay, I know how to publish these documents. Okay, so it may be more, may make it more likely. It may make it more likely that Dennis will give socially desirable answers if it is a questionnaire. It may be more likely. Yeah, now it makes sense. Okay. It may be more likely that Dennis will give socially desirable answers. That's a problem. Now, getting this first mark is, I see as a seat, is not a problem for many students. But turning this one mark into two is a little tough. And there aren't many students who end up cracking a 3-on-3 over here. So, like I said, I'd like to reiterate, do not forget having a quick look at the total number of marks that have been allocated to that question. Now, Professor March may need to hand him the questionnaire. Let's provide some detail, which could make Dennis uncomfortable or nervous and affect his responses on the question, reducing its validity. Now, this is where you're writing down about how this problem is impacting the research that Professor March is conducting. The second one, Dennis won't like being given paper for CIDS because it would make them uncomfortable or nervous, because it could make him uncomfortable and nervous. I know what's with the CIs publishing these marking schemes. Because it could make him uncomfortable or nervous, that is Dennis. How is this particular problem affecting the validity of affecting the credibility of the research? This could affect Dennis's response on the task, which would again reduce the validity. अब पहला मार्क आपको मिल रहा है, दूसरा मार्क आपको लिंक करने का मिल रहा है, और तीसरा मार्क आपको मिल रहा है इम्पैक्ट के बारे में लिखने के लिए. So you're writing how this is eventually going to affect the credibility of the research or the worth of the research. Another example we have in front of us, it may be more likely that Dennis will give socially desirable answers, because again, we're talking about a questionnaire. Both questionnaires and interviews are examples of self-report measures. And when we talk about self-report measures, demand characteristics, or if we be a little more specific here, socially desirable answers are a concern that many researchers have, especially given the topic area is sensitive, as it is about not wanting to get close, and the researcher does not see the body language, so won't know they are lying, unlike face-to-face interviews. So that again could be an issue. So in this case, what you've done is, in this third example, that the principal examiner has given us for a better understanding, is you could use comparison as a way through which you could get the third mark too. क्योंकि थर्ड एग्जाम्पल के अंदर अगर आप देखें तो आप कंपेयर कर रहे हैं उसको फेस टू फेस इंटरव्यू के साथ. Here we are through with the seventh question, which was worth 6 marks, and let's move on and talk about question 8 here. And this eighth question has a 2-mark question as part A, a 2-mark question as part B, a 2-mark question as part C. So question number 8 in total is of 6 marks as well. For 6 marks in total, we get 9 minutes. Like I say, whatever the total marks are, multiply that with 1.5 and you get your answer about the total amount of time that you should spend on a particular question. Of course, I know, I'm aware you're not wearing a stopwatch. You don't have a stopwatch on you, or even if you do, some way or the other, you don't have the time to reset it every now and then. But I mean, knowing that it's 6 marks, you would have 9 minutes would be helpful, because then the amount of time that you would want, or that you'd feel comfortable reading this over and over again. I mean, for some kids, when they're sitting in the examination hall, they want to try to save themselves as much of time as possible, which might result in them quickly skimming through the question and hopping on to the next part that is answering them. Don't do that. Read your question once, twice, thrice. So, Dr. East is observing children playing. She is a participant observer. So we're talking about a doctor, and her name is Dr. East, or we like to refer to her as Dr. East over here. And how is she collecting data? Dr. East is collecting data through observation, and she's observing children playing. She is a participant observer. Now, when she's a participant observer, we know that she's actively involved in the activities of the group, that she's collecting data on, and she is probably there in close proximity with those children playing there. The children have met Dr. East before and believe she is a playground assistant. Okay, I smell deception here. Who watches them when their teachers have lunch. So let's talk about the characters over here in total. And so we have this doctor with the name Dr. East. We like to refer to her as Dr. East. What is she up to? She is observing children who playing in the playground, and she is a participant observer who's there. And the children who are being observed, they think, or they have been kept under the impression that Dr. East is a playground assistant, and she is keeping an eye on them, probably trying to make sure that they're safe enough. As a teacher, as a children's teacher, she's having lunch. So I know there's deception here. I know this is an example of covert observation, and all of this should occur to you when you're sitting in the examination hall. And for this, then you need to for this you need to know your research methodology well. So having a look at the question over here reads, suggest one strength of using participant observation in the study. So one strength, again, the examiner has underlined the word one, ensuring that you don't write more than one, of using participant observation in the study. If you're using participant observation in this particular study, you can get close to or interact with the children, or she will be aware of the children's mood. She can approach the children, or she can easily talk to the children. Again, I'd like to re-say this question, the command word used over here is suggest. It's a 2-mark question. एंड जहां पे आपको सजेशन आपसे मांगी जाती है, आप इन एग्जांपल्स के अलावा भी कोई एग्जांपल दे सकते हैं. You could write any other strength as well. So taking this ahead, you can get Dr. East can get close to or interact with children. Now, let's link it to the rubric or the initial information that we received at the beginning. So is more likely to understand the play or the game well. So she will know whether they're enjoying playing games or not. So she can see what they're playing with. So she can ask the children what they are playing. Now, what I've highlighted over here in purple is linking it or providing more of detail about this particular case that the research is being conducted on the research that Dr. East is trying to conduct through observing the children. So, like I say, read the question well, read it a couple of times, and then so even if you're spending 30 seconds reading the question thrice, 40 seconds, 50 seconds, even a minute, you still have I mean, you're making sure you're not risking those 6 marks, because 6 marks, again, 6 marks out of 60 matter, and they matter a lot. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the second part. Suggest one advantage of Dr. East using a non-participant observation. So what if Dr. East was conducting a research through a non-participant observation compared to a participant observation? So this comparison part, I tell you, there are a lot of students, they just, I mean, once they start writing, they feel like they're in a race. And at this point, some of you might feel, oh, because the teacher does not have to sit for the examination himself, he cannot empathize, he doesn't know. See, I know it's been a while I've been doing this. It's my 20th year teaching this syllabus. If you've practiced your paper well, if you have, before you go sit for the examination, you might as well just print out any past paper. And because why is it that I'm advising you to print it out? Because in that case, you have those lines there, and you could time yourself, and then you could start writing your answers. That would give you a better idea. That would give you yeah, that will give you a better idea about how long it takes. And if you've practiced well, you have enough of time. But if you've not practiced, if prior to the paper, let's just say a week before, you just sit and you try revising Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. There are 6 different research methods that are there that are part of our AS psychology syllabus. The first one is an experiment, followed by self-report measures, followed by case studies, followed by observation, followed by correlation, followed by longitudinal research, and start learning the definitions and then learning literally. I've seen students literally rote learn strengths and limitations. Try understanding it. I've shown it to you twice earlier. I showed it to you through the CI syllabus. There are 50 marks that are uh, dedicated for questions on application. तो इन दिस केस ये सब जानने के बाद भी अगर आपको ऐसा लगता है कि मैं सिंपली डेफिनेशन याद कर लूंगा या याद कर लूंगी और मैं इन सारे क्वेश्चंस को आंसर कर पाऊंगा, you're at a mistake. So yeah, I mean, even if we talk about today, you still have more than a month, a little more than a month, and try putting pen to paper. I mean, learning is essential, but that's step one. You're done. You're through with O levels. You're done and through with O levels. You're inshallah coming to an and bringing AS, that is the advanced subsidiary level, to an end and ready to step into A2. By now, you all should have an idea that you're done and through with O levels. That was a different ball game altogether. And over here, you need to, and in this 1 year, you've grown a little too. You're a year older and inshallah better, smarter. So suggest one advantage of Dr. East using non-participant observation compared to participant observation. So suggestion of advantage of non-participant observation gets you 1 mark, and the second you get when you link it to the play. Again, I'd like to use the same. The children will be unaware she is there. If it's a non-participant observation, there's a possibility, and covert. There's distance between the researcher and the children. The researcher does not get involved in the situation. So she uses a video to record the children's behavior. She could use a second observer that is there as well. So if the children will be unaware she's there, so their play games will be more natural and there would be no demand characteristic. If you want, you could write that down. No demand characteristics. So there's distance between the researcher and the children. The researcher does not get involved in the situation, so the play game will be more natural. Again, no demand characteristics. So she would, third possible option, she could use a video to record the children's behavior, which she can use to accurately analyze the children's play. A video, you could replay it. So she could use a second observer, which means comparisons can be made to ensure they have the same results about the children's play, and over here you could bring in reliability. And yeah, that is how you make sure that you're not losing marks unnecessarily. The third part, which is again a 2-mark question, explain one ethical problem caused by the children believing that Dr. East is a playground assistant. One ethical problem that could arise. Remember, when I was reading this initial piece of information, I kept on using the word deception. So the children, if the children are kept on the impression that if you talk about these children, their behavior is being observed without them knowing that the behavior is being observed. One, that's not right. And because there's no consent that is there, and it wouldn't be wrong if we say that the children have been misled to believe that the person who's there, that is Dr. East in this case, she is a playground assistant. So you're misleading them, you're deceiving them, you have not taken consent from them. 1 mark for identifying that particular ethical problem, and the second for providing detail related to it. So they are being misled or lied to because they are told that she's a playground assistant. Deception because the participants, that is children in this case, they have been kept under the impression that the person who's physically present, that is Dr. East, she's the playground assistant again. So cannot give consent if the children are being misled. You cannot, I mean, you can only take consent when the people you're observing in this case and context when they know that data is being collected on them, or you at least intend on collecting data on them. Consent तो आप तब लेंगे ना जब उन्हें पता हो कि आप ऑब्जर्वर हैं, या जब उन्हें पता हो कि आप ऑब्जर्व करने के लिए बैठे हैं. Now let's take this ahead. This was question number 8. Okay, typically what we see is after the 6-mark question, which is usually question number 6, but not necessarily question number 6. I had mentioned we have had instances where question number 5 is turns out to be 6-mark question too. So just keep that in mind. Not that it matters, but as a student, when you go sit in the examination hall, you at times you have the paper. I mean, you have an idea about how the paper would look like. Now, for this particular question, for this particular paper, we know the last question would be a question on planning where you'd be expected to plan a study. So if anything that happens that is not in line with what you expected it to be like, there's a possibility you might not feel very comfortable, and which might result in you getting a little distracted, or you worrying about something that is not even a concern. And you can't afford to worry at this point, because remember, the clock is ticking, and those 90 minutes matter for you, and they matter a lot. Now, as I had opened this question, what I wanted you all to know and keep in mind. So usually what happens is these novel questions, they are usually, again, not necessarily, they're usually question number 7, 8, and 9. So you get 3 questions. Many students, they refer to them as scenario-based questions too, or like I had used the word novel questions, या आम ज़बान में बोला जाए कि ऐसे questions जहाँ पे एक सिचुएशन आपके सामने क्रिएट की जाती है और आपसे एक्सपेक्ट किया जाता है कि आप अपनी रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी की नॉलेज और अंडरस्टैंडिंग को जो आपने गेन किया आप उसे अप्लाई करें यहाँ पे. The ninth question, Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim, Dr. Okami, yeah, is using animals in an experiment too. So we are talking about animals being used. We're talking about experiment as a research method to study the effect of noise on learning. So studying animals and trying to study the effect of noise on learning. Nice. In this study, the animals will learn to run through narrow tunnels and will meet each other. So animals, they would run through a narrow tunnel and will meet each other. Each animal will either run through the tunnels with noise or run through the tunnels without noise. So what is the task? The animals would be made to run through narrow tunnels, and they would meet other animals. And each animal will either run through the tunnels with noise or run through the tunnels without noise. So we're talking about 2 conditions over here, 2 IVs over here. And the IV, by merely reading this, you should be able to identify what the IVs and what the DVs are here, and what the experimental design is that is being used. It's an experiment, and the IVs over here are the animals who are running through the tunnel with noise, and the second IV is the animals running through a tunnel without noise. What's the DV? The DV is the effect noise has on their learning, and animals will learn to run through narrow tunnels and will meet each other. That's you could figure out the DV from there. What sort of experimental design is being used over here? The experimental design used over here is an independent measures design, because different participants, the animals who participants in this research, they would go through different conditions. क्योंकि कुछ animals को आप आवाज वाली noise वाली tunnel से गुजारें, कुछ animals को आप बगैर आवाज वाली tunnel से गुजार रहे हैं. Explain whether the experimental design of Dr. Kami studies repeated measures design or independent measures design. So we all know, like I just said before we even read the question, this is an independent measures design. But like I had mentioned right at the beginning, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first question, you were asked to explain. So by simply writing down independent measures design, you're not getting that mark. Independent measures design, because each animal only does one level of the IV, that is either with or without noise, not both. That's explanation, and you're explaining to get that 1 mark. Question number 9B, Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. The independent variable over here is with noise or without noise, and the dependent variable is learn to run through the tunnels. Define what is meant by the terms independent variable and dependent variables. Super simple. So It's a 2-mark question. Define what is meant by the term. So there are 2 terms they've asked you to define them, and yeah, so you get 1 mark for each, as simple as it could be. So the marks are for definitions and not examples. And independent variable is manipulated by the researcher to create. Now, one more thing, another mistake that students make at this point. See, they've asked you to define. If you end up saying independent variable over here is with noise or without noise, you're not getting your mark, because the command word over here was defined. They did not ask you to identify or outline what the IVs were. They asked you to define what an independent variable means and define what a dependent variable means. In this case, Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim, independent variable is manipulated by the researcher to create 2 or more different conditions or levels. And the researcher, that is Dr. Okami, had created 2 different conditions. One, the animals running with noise in the tunnel, and the second one, they're running without noise. The dependent variable is measured to see the effect of IV, or dependent variable यहाँ पे आप figure out कर रहे थे यहाँ से, them learning how to run through the tunnel to be able to meet other animals. 9C. So question number 9. Question number 9 in itself, this looks like a heavy one here. So in total, this is 1 marks and 2 marks, 2 and 1, 3 and 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Question number 9, we see this is a 10-mark question. So again, the more I see it's a 10-mark question, I should remind myself I have 15 minutes on this, and I should not hesitate reading this over and over again. And one more thing, a tiny little trick if it works for you. This particular question, this is question number 9. We see that this has been divided into a lot of parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The likelihood that by the time you get to the third question, you might end up forgetting the initial piece of information is always there. So there's no harm. कोई इसमें बुराई नहीं है कि आप जब क्वेश्चन पढ़ रहे से थर्ड पार्ट पे आ जाएं, आप दोबारा चले जाएं पीछे, ठीक है? अक्सर बच्चे ये नहीं करते. So many students, they choose not to do that. Why not? Do it, please. Had I done it? Yes, I would have done it. And many students, if they having to read that initial piece of information over and over again, they feel a little frustrated. They're like, oh, they feel bad about themselves. They'll try to be too strict on themselves because they know that the clock is ticking. It is totally okay. It's a 10-mark question. We cannot afford to not do it. That's how you're supposed to do it. 10 नंबर का सवाल है, 5 पॉइंट्स 5 पार्ट्स में डिवाइडेड है, ठीक है? एक ऐसा पार्ट भी है जो कि 1 नंबर का है, एक ऐसा पार्ट भी है जो कि 4 नंबर का है. तो आप उन नंबर्स को क्यों बिला वजह, why is it that you're unnecessarily putting those numbers at risk? You shouldn't. So Dr. Kami needs to follow ethical guidelines in relation to animals. There are different ethical guidelines that are there for humans versus animals, and we've had discussions on this many times. Dr. Kami will use reinforcement to help the animals to learn to run through the narrow tunnels. Suggest one way that the animals could be reinforced. Your answer must be ethical. So a way of reinforcement could be deprivation, then a reward. Them being rewarded once they do what they're expected to do well. And you could give them food, you could give them water, you could give them any treat. And since they've asked you to only give one suggestion, I suggest choose any 3 of these. And yeah, treat is, who doesn't like a treat? Everyone does. And reinforcement, what sort of reinforcement is this? This would be an example of positive reinforcement. And this positive reinforcement, you have studied this under the heading of operant conditioning. You've studied operant conditioning while doing Sauerland and Silverman, while doing Fagan as well. So let's take this ahead. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, 9C part 2. Dr. Kami needs to follow the guideline of species. So what is the takeaway here? Okay, let me read this and then I'll say what I had to. Explain 2 ways that Dr. Okami's choice of animal will be affected by following this guideline. Choose a small animal. Do not choose a large animal. Explanation, the guideline that you're referring to over here is species. As tunnels are narrow. Now see this tiny little word that most of you probably did not even take into account earlier. See this tiny word. It's a narrow tunnel. If it's a narrow animal, you need a smaller animal who would be able to run through it. You don't want to physically harm the animal. So explain two ways that Dr. Okami's choice of animal will be affected by following this guideline. It's a 4-mark question. Now this matters. Choose a small two ways, right? So so it's a 4-mark question. They asked you for two ways, and in this case, you dedicate 2 marks each for an explanation that you're providing. Choose a small animal so that it does not, and do not choose a large animal. As tunnels are narrow, animals need to pass. Or you can add, not or, and, because there are 2 points that have been asked. And choose a social species, as the animals will meet each other. They might, if it's not a social species, this might result in aggression. Now, see again, how many of you, just question yourself, you don't need to answer me. Question yourself, how many of you actually did have a feeling that these words that I'm marking right now would eventually put 2 marks at risk? So reading this again and again does not, you're not losing anything, and you're not losing time, because if you're, okay, so because there's a question, wait, I'll answer that. So because if you're not, what do you call it? Because if you're not focusing on these 2 points, then you're risking those 2 marks. And yeah, if you calculate overall the amount of time, the amount of marks that could possibly be at risk if you're having to read it one more time, it does not, you're not losing anything. So taking this ahead, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dr. Okami needs to follow the guideline of minimizing harm. Suggest why this guideline is relevant. Why is it that this guideline is relevant? Noise could be distressing, or this could cause pain to animals. It's a narrow tunnel, 2 ends. Other social animals could be distressing, or this could be uh, painful for the animals that Dr. Okami has chosen as participants in the research that is being mentioned here. Now, taking this ahead, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. The question that was asked over here was, should we write uh, the fear of animals being extinct over here? See, when the initial rubric that you've received, the initial piece of information that you received, now you see, once by the time you read this point to this point, or by the time you have this point, sorry. Okay, sorry. By the time you get to this point, things start making more sense to you. See, even this says link to the stem or the rubric, stem or the initial piece of information that has been provided to you. So I would have not done that. Now, taking this ahead, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the last question, and this question is the one that I see students not being very happy about. Now, for this particular question, which is always the last question, is divided into parts. It's the first part is of 10 marks, where you are asked to plan a study. Dr. Astor is interviewing people about their exciting experiences. He's interested in people's feelings about different types of exciting experience. Wait, I did not read it well. So Dr. Astor is in, let's do it all over again. Yeah. Dr. Astor is interviewing people about their exciting experiences. I think I'd read it experiments earlier, my bad. So Dr. Astor is interviewing people about their exciting experiences. He is interested in people's feelings about different types of exciting experience. Describe how Dr. Astor could conduct a study using an interview to investigate people's feelings about different types of exciting experience. Do not describe, don't forget this part, do not describe sample or the sampling technique or ethical issues or guidelines in your answer. So one, stay away from this, number two from this, number three from this, or number four from this. Now, I've had detailed I have a detailed video on this, and I have when we were doing these planning and study question, I had focused on. I had mentioned how for the 6 different research methods that you have, what your syllabus actually has information related to all of this. I mean, I'd have to walk you through the entire syllabus to help you get there. So these are the 6 different research methods that you need to know. This is on page number 20. So see, this says this is your syllabus. This is from your syllabus. Candidates need to understand research methodology used by psychologists to investigate humans and animal behavior. See section 4, details of assessment for more information on what candidates should be able to do with the subject content in this section for planning studies question in paper number 2 on page number 50. So these are the different research methods that you could be tested on. Here, 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 here. Now, let's quickly get to page number 50 so that I could actually show it to you. Now, step number 1 for these questions, see, this is page number 50. This is the planning study question. Plan studies should include these general features. In other words, any question that you're getting should include all of this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, procedure of the study. Number 2, how the plan makes the study valid. Whatever the plan is, how is it, or what are you doing to add on the what exactly is a part of your plan that would increase the validity of the study, how the plan makes the study reliable, and the type of data that you're collecting to write down what quantitative and qualitative data. Now, these are general features, these are essential, and this you need to do. This is something that has to be, you cannot skip this. Plan studies using specific research methods to include required features. Now, if you remember this question over here, they've asked you to describe how Dr. Astor could conduct a study using an interview. Okay. So just like interview is an example of a self-report measure, you see these 6 different research methods that are part of your syllabus. For each research method, you have certain features mentioned. And of course, if I stick to the question, and you know what, if you haven't attended any class on planning a study questions earlier, or if you haven't taken it seriously, I'd want to advise you to go back and go through that video. At this point, this is what I can offer. And know that all of these features that you see in front of you, all of them, they need to be learned. And it's something like this. If you're getting a question on experiment, make sure you're mentioning these at least, right? Along with these general features. So in this typical case, the question that I was showing you, we had, it was on interviews. And of course, if it's an interview, this is what needs to be a part of your answer. So this, let me just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you're not writing something that's totally absurd, if you're not writing something that's unrealistic, if you're not writing something that is methodologically incorrect, and if you have what I've highlighted over here, specifically this part and this part, I mean, these are general features, I'll mark this as 1, and these are specific features. If you're adding these in your answer and you're not making it too unrealistic, you end up getting marks. So the first thing for planning a study question is know all of this well. Once you've learned it, bring a paper, open up question paper in front of you. Just figure out what the research method is that is mentioned there, and then write in front of it. Over here you have the marking sheet in front of you, but if it would have just been the paper here, uske samne aap likhe sari features. Question yourself, ask yourself, will you be able to recall them in the examination hall? If not, then you need to relearn them. So test yourself in this case. Now, taking this ahead, Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. This particular question, in this particular question, you get marks through levels. The highest level over here is level number 5. And this says it has all the required features, whatever the features were that I put into box and showed it to you, all are there with detail with mostly appropriate terminology. Let's just skip the word mostly over here. Let's just say appropriate terminology is a must-have here. and it clearly applies knowledge. Remember, the assessment objective that mattered the most for paper 2 was AO2, that was application. Clearly applies knowledge of methodology involving in planning and investigation. This is the only way for anyone to score a 9 on 10. So read all through all of this. I'm a little short on time here. So read through all of this, and this is going to help you. These are the essential features. Now, there are so many students who would be like, I mean, this is the question that I've seen students fear from a lot. How do you make yourself better? By practice. Keep on practicing. Trial and error is the only way you can get better at this. And yeah, the more answers you write, I mean, there are students whom I've seen, they just write a paragraph and they'd come running to the teacher, can read this. No, write a complete answer. Write a complete answer. These days, I mean, the requirement is there. You just saw that you've been marked through levels. You just saw what the I showed you what the criteria is. This was the criteria. I mean, see if you have all of this present there, and you're good. Now, a major mistake. I mean, there's a detailed video that I have on this. If anyone of you, by any chance at all, hasn't had access to it, let me know, and I'll share the link with you. Go through that, and that give you a thorough understanding. And yeah, I mean, the rest I mentioned it in that video. So this particular question is divided into two parts, and the first part is of 10 marks and the second part is of 4 marks, and it is always like this, keeping the current paper structure in mind. So for one part of procedure, you described in A, describe one practical or methodological strength of this part of the procedure, and you have special instructions of not referring to sampling or ethics in your answer. And describe one practical or methodological weakness of this part of the answer. Do not refer to sampling or ethics. So a practical or a methodological strength is what is asked for, and a practical and a methodological weakness is what is asked. So a practical or methodological strength over here could be this. I mean, you could use any of these, or you can use any besides and beyond this as well. And so is the case with this. So yeah, it's been long already, and I hope so. This was what paper was this? This was October, November 2025. Inshallah, I would try to in the next class, tomorrow the same time. Inshallah, I would want to discuss this October, November 2025 paper 2 variant 2. So yeah, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.